The chill that settled on the Montreal November evening was nowhere to be found inside the elegant Windsor Hotel. Tonight, beside the fires, the men of professional hockey were meeting, and although they were unaware, they were the architects of the future of their sport. The meeting began quietly, but soon the undercurrents of conflicting interest boiled over. The meeting ended with a slammed door, the Montreal Wanderers being ejected from the league.
100 years ago, in 1909, the fall of 1909, there was one hockey league in Canada, Eastern Canada Hockey League. They called themselves amateur, but they're really professional because they were paid. They had their annual meeting late November at the Windsor Hotel in Montreal. And they decided at that meeting to kick the Montreal Wanderers out of the league because they thought that their rink, the Jubilee rink, was too small. It only held 1,600 people. Somehow my grandfather in Renfrew, the Senator M.J. O'Brien, heard about this, and he sent his son, Ambrose, my Uncle Ambrose, down to Montreal to meet with Jimmy Gardner, who owned the Wanderers.
Within days, the snub would lead to the creation of the National Hockey Association. Now, without a league, the Wanderers worked together with a rich, aspiring owner named Ambrose O'Brien to create their vision of professional hockey. A vision that, in addition to O'Brien, teams from Ontario and the Wanderers had to include something for French Montrealers. That something would be the Montreal Canadiens. A week later, December 4, 1909, the new league met to iron out the details. Even with the plan in hand, the renegade group made a last-ditch offer to the existing French team in Montreal, the National. They were turned down.
Devant le refus de leur part, les délégués ont décidé que ça leur prenait un club canadien-français en opposition au national. Un des délégués présents cet après-midi-là, c'était M. Thomas C. Hare de Cobalt, qui représentait les intérêts de O'Brien. On a accordé une franchise à M. Hare. M. Hare s'est levé et il a dit j'assure le coût de la franchise au coût de 1 000 $ et je dépose 5 000 $ dans 2 jours dans la banque pour assurer le salaire des joueurs. Un autre délégué présent à cette réunion-là, M. Jean-Baptiste Jack de la Violette, un joueur de hockey qui venait de l'Ontario et propriétaire du Jack's Cage, un établissement sur l'île Notre-Dame, c'est lui qui a donné le mandat de gérer et d'organiser ce futur club oppositionniste francophone-là. Et le choix unanime des délégués pour choisir le nom de cette équipe nouvelle-là, francophone, c'était le Canadien.
There was not much time. The season would start in a month, so Jack Laviolette worked furiously to form his new team. He called in favors and contacted old friends. Didier Pitre came from Sault Ste. Marie, Edouard Newsy-Lalonde, a scoring champion from Southern Ontario, signed on, joining Montrealers Joe Katarinich, Georges Poulain, Ed Descaries, and Art Bernier. Just after New Year's Day 1910, everybody was ready. And in front of over 3,000 fans, the puck was dropped. For the first time.
Le Canadien de Montréal a joué son premier match le 5 janvier 1910 à l'Arena Jubilee contre les Silver Kings de Cobalt. Le premier but dans l'histoire de la franchise a été marqué par Newsy Lalonde à 17 minutes de la première période. L'équipe a remporté une victoire de 7-6 en surtemps sur un but de George Skinner-Poulain à 5:35 de la période de surtemps.
The French-speaking Montrealers did not embrace the team. It wasn't attracting them as a crowd. And the Canadiens in that initial season wore a blue sweater, white pants, and red socks. And the reason why they chose those colors was because they were the colors of the flag of France, le tricolore. And French Canadians of the day would wave le tricolore at parades, political gatherings, and other public events because they were certainly not going to wave the Canadian flag at the time, which was the Union Jack, which was a symbol of oppression to them.
À l'automne 1910, lors de la réunion annuelle du NHA, deux représentants d'un club athlétique de Montréal, M. Adolphe Lecourt et M. George Kendall Kennedy, sont présentés à la réunion annuelle du NHA pour demander une franchise de hockey.
Ambrose O'Brien only owned the Canadiens for a year. He didn't want to pick up the Bills for the second year. And as it happened, there was a very eager suitor waiting in the wings named George Kennedy.
With the team in the hands of Kennedy, it was time to make a commitment to the city and to the game. The uncertainty that had clouded the birth of the team was gone, and Laviolette set about building a winner. That winner would start between the pipes.
1910-11 aussi marque l'arrivée du premier grand gardien-but de l'histoire du Canadien de Montréal, Georges Vézina, qui arrive de Chicoutimi, et qui va connaître une carrière longue et fructueuse avec le Canadien de Montréal.
And George Vezina picked up the game on the streets. He was a road hockey player for all intents and purposes. He never put on skates till he was 16, but he was very good. And so he's the goaltender when the Canadiens come up there in that inaugural season.
Vézina brought his magic to the crease, and the rest of the team had to step up as well. The task was to bring the Stanley Cup to Montreal again. Newsy Lalonde, by now coach as well as player, was given an ultimatum. Win or you're gone. Canadiens began to win.
Au cours de la saison 1915-1916, menée par leur premier grand trio, formé de Newsy Lalonde, Jack Laviolette et Didier Pitt, le Canadien remporte le championnat de sa ligue, du NHL, et va en finale, partir de la finale de la Coupe Stanley à Montréal contre les représentants de la côte du Pacifique, les Portland Rosebuds, que les Canadiens battent.
And so the press box was always full. There was always immense pressure to win because, in fact, the year that they won the first Stanley Cup, they started off poorly, and the board of directors held a meeting, and they came out of it and gave Newsy Lalonde an ultimatum. And this team they were the flag bearers of French Canada, or French Montreal at the time, and they were expected to win.
Finalement, le 26 novembre 1917, à l'Hôtel Windsor à Montréal, on dissout la NHA pour fonder une nouvelle ligue, la Ligue nationale de hockey. Les 4 clubs fondateurs sont les Canadiens de Montréal, les Wanderers de Montréal, les Athletic Bulldogs de Québec et le club Ottawa. Frank Calder, le secrétaire de la NHA, devient le nouveau président de cette nouvelle ligue-là et secrétaire trésorier.
The Quebec Bulldogs would remain part of the NHL for only days, having troubles with, among other things, filling out a roster with the heavy wartime demands on young men. A team from Toronto came in and the remaining Bulldogs were divided up amongst the other teams. It was effectively the NHL's first draft.
Québec décide de retarder sa venue dans la Ligue et on tient un repêchage spécial pour disperser ses joueurs aux 4 autres équipes. On a fait un repêchage spécial où l'ordre du repêchage était basé sur le classement de la NHA l'année précédente. Les Wanderers ont le premier choix, le Canadien le deuxième. Les Wanderers, avec le premier choix, laissent passer le super étoile Joe Malone. Joe Malone, au deuxième rang, Canadien de prenne. Ils ont l'occasion de jumeler Malone avec le super vedette Newsy Lalonde et avoir les 2 gros marqueurs de la première époque du hockey professionnel de 1907 à 1926 sur la même équipe. Puis en plus de ça, ils ont jumelé les 2 avec Didier Pitt pour former le premier gros trio explosif de la Ligue nationale de hockey.
The Canadiens are one of the founding franchises of the National Hockey League. Kennedy's one of the founding fathers, takes them in November of 1917. And then what's very interesting was there was 4 teams. There was a Toronto franchise, there was the Ottawa Senators, there was the Montreal Wanderers, and there was the Montreal Canadiens. And the Canadiens and the Wanderers were both based at the Westmount Arena.
Le 2 janvier 1918, l'Arena Montréal-Westmount, qui est le domicile du Canadien et des Wanderers, est incendié. Les Wanderers perdent leur équipement et cessent leurs activités. Le Canadien récupère une partie de son équipement et transfère ses activités de matchs locaux à l'Arena Jubilee.
The NHL's down to 3 teams, and Kennedy keeps the whole thing afloat because 3 nights later, they got a home game against the Senators, and he borrows equipment from a men's team in the Montreal neighborhood of Hochelaga, and they play that game at the Jubilee Rink, deep in the east end of French-speaking Montreal, a little barn with 3,500 seats. And they play a game with somebody else's equipment and uniforms. The Canadiens finish the season, and the league survives, thanks to George Kennedy.
By 1918, North America was coming out from under the cloud of the Great War. But another cloud was on the horizon: Spanish influenza. The initial onslaught waned by the time the hockey season was underway, but a second wave began during the Stanley Cup playoffs, hitting the Canadiens hard. Kennedy and 5 of his 9 players were affected. Bad Joe Hall succumbed within days. With Kennedy it took much longer, but was no less deadly. Never fully recovered, he died in 1921 at age 39.
George Kendall Kennedy, au mois d'octobre 1921, décède des séquelles de la grippe espagnole et c'est son frère Frank Kendall qui s'occupe de sa succession. Frank Kendall vend le Canadien pour un montant de 11 000 aux trois mousquetaires du sport, Léo Dandurand, Joe Katerinich et Louis de Tourneau. Et cette négociation et cette vente-là a été orchestrée par Cecil Hart, qui représente les trois mousquetaires.
Kennedy had been a sporting legend in Montreal, and his passing was mourned. He was the man that had truly given the city the gift of l'équipe des habitants, a French team that traveled the country and brought home the glory under the flag of the Bleu, Blanc, Rouge. Even in the homes of rival teams, the legend of the Canadiens was growing.
By the 1920s, Ottawa was not drawing very well. It was a small market city. While the Senators were doing quite well, the crowds just weren't coming out. But there was one exception. Whenever Les Canadiens came to town, the place would be packed. And on one occasion, when the Canadiens beat the Senators, the mayor of Hull, who was in attendance, came down to the Montreal dressing room and went in and handed in $1,000 as a bonus to all the players, and they, of course, divided it up.
Le noyau central de l'équipe qui existait depuis le début du club en 1909-10 jusqu'à peu près les années 1913-14, les joueurs sont en train de vieillir, soit qui ont pris leur retraite, qui vont prendre leur retraite ou sont échangés. On voit des joueurs comme Lalonde, Laviolette, Pitt, Bert Corbeau et Louis Berlinguet qui vieillissent, sont dans les dernières années de carrière.
Whether Dandurand and his fellow musketeers Katerinich and Letourneau liked it or not, the newly acquired team was getting older and slower. They had to bring in new blood to revitalize Kennedy's Canadiens, transform them into their Canadiens. Since the departure of Joe Malone in 1919, the fans were desperate for a star, and the support Kennedy had built was beginning to falter. Dandurand made a dramatic decision to trade Newsy Lalonde. Montrealers were aghast. In spite of Lalonde's faltering stats, he still wore the halo of a dozen seasons leading Les Canadiens. Dandurand gambled. He made a deal for an unknown player from the Saskatoon Sheiks named Aurel Joliat.
I was there the night that Aurel Joliat killed off a penalty all by himself. Just think of it. They couldn't get the puck off him. And he ended up on the bench exhausted, because 2 minutes of ragging the puck is pretty difficult when you got 5 guys running at you, And but he did it. One of the funny things about Aurel, as small as he was, if he wanted to make a point, he would take his finger and pump you in the chest. And it was like you being hit with a 6-inch nail. Powerful. And we all used to laugh at that because Aurel sometimes would get excited, and want to make a real point.
The next season, a new face appeared at training camp, a quiet kid with a golden touch around the net. His name, Howie Morenz. Joliat and his new teammate became the core of the resurgent team, and with the fabulous Georges Vézina in net, the Canadiens won their second Stanley Cup. Now fans had something to cheer about, a team that could once again be dominant. But the strength of this team would be tested in the coming months.
Au cours de cet automne-là de 1925, Georges Vézina ne se sent pas bien, le gardien de but régulier du Canadien. Il est même placé au repos par un médecin dû à une grippe. Puis lorsqu'il se présente au match d'ouverture du Canadien le 28 novembre 1925 à l'Arena Mont-Royal, il a une forte fièvre.
When he starts the first game and he's gaunt and spectral looking, he's lost 35 pounds in training camp and he's too sick to finish the game. He goes into the dressing room, takes off the pads after the first period.
Il joue la première période, il est incapable de continuer. C'est Alphonse Anne Lacroix qui le remplace pour les 2 autres périodes. Et c'est la dernière fois qu'on va voir Vézina dans l'uniforme du Canadien.
Without Vézina, the Canadiens have a terrible season. In March of 1926, George Vézina dies in his hometown of Chicoutimi. 1,500 people packed the cathedral. There's 800 Catholic masses said in the honor of George Vezina.
Et Vezina a été un gardien de but réellement régulier pour le Canadien de Montréal. Il n'a manqué aucune partie dans la saison régulière et les séries pendant 15 ans, de 1910 jusqu'à 1925. Et on doit admettre sans se tromper que c'était un des deux grands gardiens de but de son époque. Dan Durant, Katarinic et les Tourneaux font un don de la Ligue nationale d'un trophée au nom de Georges Vezina pour perpétuer sa mémoire.
The spirit, the will, and the legend of Georges Vezina would live on in the eponymous award. But for the Canadiens, it was time to move on. Vezina's death and the subsequent events in Quebec made it clear that by the late 20s, the Canadiens were more than a hockey team. They were part of the culture. However, Dan Dudon and his partners knew from experience that losing was not an option. The team would focus on the future and build on their legacy through grit and perseverance.
En septembre 1935, le Canadien est revendu. Les deux mousquetaires sur les trois qui demeurent, Joe Katarinic et Dio Dan Durant, vendent l'équipe pour un montant variant de 165 à 175 000 $ à un syndicat de trois hommes d'affaires montréalais formés de Ernest Savard, Lucien Forget et Louis Gélina, qui en réalité, les autres servent de façade pour la Canadian Arena Company, qui, elle, est propriétaire du Forum et des Maroons de Montréal. C'était une période de noirceur pour le Canadien, empreinte de tragédie. Premièrement, le noyau central des équipes qui gagnaient la Coupe Stanley en 1923, 24, 30 et 31, ces joueurs-là vieillissaient et ils étaient sur le point de prendre leur retraite ou ils prenaient leur retraite. Des joueurs comme Lépine, Hainsworth, Morenz, Joliette vieillissaient et étaient sur le point de quitter. Puis c'est sûr que c'était pas facile de remplacer ce talent-là et de le renouveler. Au cours de cette période-là, le Canadien n'a gagné aucune série éliminatoire, en plus de manquer les séries éliminatoires de 1935-36. La saison suivante, l'année qu'on a récupéré, on est allé chercher pour une deuxième fois Howie Morenz des Rangers de New York. On l'avait jumelé avec Joliette et Gagnon pour débuter l'année. Et le 28 janvier 1937, lors d'un match contre les Blackhawks de Chicago, il y a eu le malheur de se fracturer une jambe en haut de la cheville.
Morenz was without a doubt the star of the team, and the city was shocked that their prodigal son, so soon returned, had been dramatically sidelined. The break was bad, and Morenz was in the hospital for weeks. As the visitors streamed in and out, day after day, Morenz became less and less sure that he would ever play hockey again. 4 weeks into his recovery, he took a turn for the worse, and the team doctor decided to restrict visitors. Howie Morenz continued to weaken, perhaps in part due to his worries about his future in hockey. And on March 8th, he died, some said, of a broken heart. Howie Morenz Jr. met a woman on the streets of Montreal, a former nurse at St. Luke's Hospital.
And she said to me that your father died of a heart attack, but that isn't why he died. Why he died is blood clots. And she says, I'll deny having ever said this to you, but in the meantime, the doctor knew about those blood clots. And he said he would work on it tomorrow morning. That was March 7th. She'll never forget it. And he died during the night. And, God. Still bothers me. Everybody showed up at the house that night. Ernie Savard, Cecil Hart, anybody connected with management, they were aghast. But I can believe that nurse's story because I had seen his leg, and it was an awful color. Oh my, unbelievable. Yellow, red, dark blue, green. It was like he was contaminated, you know. And but that is the true story, I believe.
Once again, it seemed dark for the Canadiens. but only on the surface. There was light, such as the incredible support that the fans gave the team. Although unable to accept losing or poor play, the fans bled bleu, blanc, rouge. Their support ran so deep that sometimes it almost appeared to vanish, until the turmoil and grief surrounding the funerals of Morans and Vézina saw it revived. The other beacon of light, perhaps less tangible, was a man named Hector Toe Blake.
Et en dépit de toute cette période de noirceur-là et de tragédie, il y a une lueur d'espoir qui s'est pointée. L'arrivée de Toe Blake en février 1936, qui arrivait les Maroons, et lui devenait la première pièce maîtresse et le premier élément important pour bâtir les équipes championnes des années 40.
On the brink of war in Europe and still shaking off the vestiges of the Great Depression, it was not the best of times in Montreal. The crosstown rival Maroons had been forced to suspend operations in 1938, and it seemed like the Habs had moved into the basement the Maroons had vacated. President of the company that owned the Forum, Senator Donat Raymond took control of the team following a disastrous 1939 season.
During that year, the Montreal Canadiens were the worst team in hockey, almost one of the worst teams in history. They only won 10 games in a 48-game season, and I think, funny, they won 6 of their first 10, I think it was. So that means that they only won 4 of their next 38. That's how bad they were, and nobody was going to games in Montreal. The franchise, they had lost the Maroons, and the Montreal Canadiens were in severe danger of folding.
À la fin des années 30, début 40, c'était des équipes très faibles. C'était des équipes très faibles. On avait beaucoup de difficultés à former une équipe homogène, à trouver des bons gardiens de but.
Somebody mentioned how one of the worst things that was wrong with the Canadiens was they had no discipline. The team was just no discipline at all. And Smythe said, I've got just the guy who will give that team, put discipline back into that team. He says, Irvin.
He gave us a verbal book of rules. The things you could do and the things you couldn't do. And you couldn't do anything to jeopardize the Canadiens.
Les joueurs étaient ensemble. Moi, je dis toujours que le hockey aujourd'hui, c'est un sport d'équipe. Fait que nous autres, dans le temps, je me souviens, Dick Irvin, il pouvait arriver puis appeler 400 joueurs puis dire, après-midi, vous allez venir manger avec moi. Ça, c'était quelque chose de bien pour Dick Irvin. Puis en mangeant, sans dire que tu es responsable de telle chose, il savait comment nous parler, puis on l'écoutait beaucoup aussi.
Irvin he was a great Canadian supporter. When he came here, he loved it here, and that's what he stressed. It was Canadian.
Senator Raymond and Coach Irvin turned the team around, built around the scoring power of the punchline. Toe Blake, Elmer Locke, and newcomer Maurice Rocket Richard, the Habs began to win again. By 1944, the team took its 5th Stanley Cup, and their 6th in 1946. The team was playing well, the coaching was strong, but Senator Raymond had learned well the lessons of the past. The Canadiens needed to be more than a strong hockey team. They needed to be a strong business. Frank Selke had been general manager of the Toronto Maple Leafs, running the team during the war in Conn Smythe's absence. But since Smythe's return, the relationship had soured.
Dick Irvin, in the meantime, talked to his owner, Senator Raymond, and said, we need a new general manager, and Frank Selke's available, get him. My dad and Senator Raymond had a marvelous relationship, and he was able to do so many of the things that he did in Montreal because Senator Raymond said, you're the boss. I have the money, you spend it for me.
The Forum was all brown. The so-called box seats were individual chairs. Fans used to get mad and throw the chairs out on the ice at the referee or something. And then the rest was benches, and it was nothing but the same color, just a dark, dismal, dreary-looking brown color. And Getlov said that's his main memory of that, just skating out on the ice and playing the game and looking up and seeing, as he used to call it, all those empty brown seats.
In the early 40s there, we would get 8,000 to 9,000 on a Saturday night And on Sundays, the Royals played. They all played Sunday afternoon. They'd get full house.
My father's contribution to that, to the organization, was really that he helped it to survive. When he moved into Montreal in 1946, there were 9,600 seats in the Montreal Forum. A gross gate for an NHL game was $11,000. Now just stop and think for a minute. $11,000 a game when you've got the Rocket and Toe Blake and Elmer Locke and Butch Bouchard and Bill Dernan and all those people. There were several thousand seats in the north end of the arena called the Millionaire section. They were fenced off. You couldn't get into them other than by buying a ticket into that area. The first thing he did was he took the fences down and repriced the tickets. So the tickets were the same as everywhere else.
Mr. Selke cut down the size of the seats. And of course, that on a per row basis made room for another 40, 50 people, you know.
They raised the roof, added enough seats so there were 12,300 seats.
and the bucks were rolling in.
And finally, there was enough money there. The senator said, Mr. Selke, whatever you want to do to spend this money, go ahead and do it. So Dad started the farm system. And of course, they spent an immense amount of money in the province of Quebec developing the junior ranks there.
If there was one man who came to symbolize the 40s and early 50s, it was Rocket Richard. Richard became the embodiment of the Gallic fire that was the spirit that the Canadiens had built for themselves, with a now long line of flying Frenchmen like Lalonde and Joliat. However, he did not have a strong start in the combative NHL of the time.
He was full of piss and vinegar, you say, then, and you could see he was going to be a goal scorer, even when he was playing senior.
Hey, the first time I saw Rocket Richard play, he broke his leg, which had been the 40 in late December of 42. And he didn't play another game that year. He had scored 2 goals that night on Frank Brimsek.
And he came out of the corner, and this night we were playing Boston, and Johnny Crawford, he hit him. When he hit him, it was right in front of the net.
Then he gets body checked by Johnny Crawford, right in front of where we're sitting, and Dr. Mackay, the team doctor, was sitting beside my mother. The Rocket went down in a heap.
When Rocket went down, he went down in a peculiar angle, you would say, and broke his leg.
And the doctor said to my mother, that man has a broken leg. She never forgot that. And he left his seat and went right around the ice, okay? And that was the end of Rocket. He never came back. And for that season.
When he would stand there, he wouldn't stand like we would normally. He'd be out, his feet were a little crooked. And we used to kid him, we always used to say, Rocket, stand up.
They were talking about his style and wondering if he could ever make it because of the way he played the game. Because he had broken legs in senior hockey, broken elbow, broken arm, junior, senior hockey, you know, all of that. And they were wondering, this guy ever going to hang in here? Is he too brittle? Anyway, he hung in.
The Rocket was of a time. He seemed more than a solitary man, more an amalgam, the quintessential hockey player. He didn't do everything, but in a time of tough as nails, take no prisoners hockey, he stood tall.
The Rock was the best one-punch knockout guy in the history of hockey, I think. I mean, I don't mean just knocking a guy down. I don't mean ragdolling a guy around the ice. He never did that. Like Red Story, the old referee, used to say to me, Rocket never started anything, but he finished a lot. And that's exactly the way the Rocket operated, and they went after him.
On voyait ça de ce temps-là. Les gens supportaient Maurice Richard. Même, je me souviens que dans toutes les bagarres que Maurice peut avoir eues, on était toujours d'accord avec Maurice. Il fallait qu'il se défende parce qu'en réalité, étant donné qu'il était le meilleur joueur, il était toujours sur lui.
The best players in that era were the toughest players. That's what I find hard. They weren't the fancy Dan guys. You know, Ted Lindsay led the league in scoring. Rocket used to get the most goals. Milt Schmidt led the league in scoring. These were tough hockey players. They'd cut your ankles off. Elmer Locke won 2 scoring championships. There wasn't a meaner player at times than Elmer Locke. But that's what you had to do.
The Rocket's skill, his tenacity, and perhaps most of all his humanity made him more than a hockey player to the fans of Les Canadiens. Late in the 1954-55 season, Maurice Richard was involved in the event that more than any other moved him from hockey star to near deity.
It was obvious that that Morris had gone off the deep end. He had been cut by Hal Lako accidentally, but cut, and if there was anything that set Rocket off, it was his blood.
Et j'ai vu Maurice se passer la main, et quand il a vu le sang, il s'est relevé et a cherché à partir, après de trouver l'écho. Un juge de ligne, je pense que son nom est Thompson, a voulu s'interposer, empêcher Maurice.
The reason that broke out was not Rocket's fault. Rocket didn't like anybody on his back while the guy's taking a punch at him. And therefore, you know, Mr. Campbell saw another way and suspended Rocket.
Whether this type of conduct is the product of temperamental instability or willful defiance of the authority in the game does not matter. Richard will be suspended from all games, both league and playoff, for the balance of the current season.
It's difficult for me to say if it was fair or not, but I was expecting the last 4 or 5 games left in the regular schedule. I didn't expect, personally, honestly, including the playoff.
With all of the fuss of Rocket's suspension and so on, the team was down, and the first period was a bit of a disaster.
À mesure que la partie avançait, là, tu sentais il y a quelque chose qui était pour arriver. Et justement, quand ça arrivait, on s'est reviré. Là, c'est là que ça s'est passé sur M. Campbell. Les gens montaient, descendaient, ça garochait, toutes sortes de choses. Et puis, à un moment donné, là, ça a éclaté. Et puis, quand ça a éclaté, bien là, c'était le free-for-all. Autrement dit, tout le monde s'essayait de sauver, ça sautait par-dessus un l'autre. Parce qu'il y avait eu lancé sur la glace une genre de bombe qui a fait exploser. Puis ça, dehors, c'est là que c'était le pire. Là. Tout le monde cassait vite. Les tramways, les vitres.
My dad came running home one night and he said, "There's something going on at the Forum. Let's go down there." So we wandered down to the Forum, and it was the Rocket Richard riot. So he paid to get on a streetcar for the two of us because the streetcar wasn't going anywhere. It was surrounded by people. And we had a front row view of this whole riot with all the floats and that sort of thing of the Rocket Richard riot.
The riot wound down as the sun rose, leaving a swath of destruction in the streets that paralleled that of the Habs' playoff hopes.
Je me souviens comme M. Selke soit venu après la première période et qu'il a dit, les gars, vous pouvez vous déshabiller. Le commissaire des incendies demande d'évacuer la place.
I remember my dad telling me sometime later that it was the most disappointing day of his life, that he had to sign the sheet with Clarence Campbell forfeiting the game. He said, I can't imagine that I would ever have had to do something like that.
We didn't appreciate Rocket being suspended, really. It wasn't the right thing to do. I mean, he wasn't that type of individual. And for Mr. Campbell to make that decision, it showed that's how much the fans loved the hockey players of Montreal, and especially the Rocket.
I was really wowed by this tremendous sort of energy that existed, this sort of the feeling about Clarence Campbell and the Rocket and that sort of thing, and really sort of starting to understand Montreal and Quebec.
It was, I mean, I remember walking on St. Catherine after that game when they threw everything at Mr. Campbell. And we didn't like to see that. Rocket didn't like to see that, but it was the fans that didn't appreciate what he did to Rocket in suspending him.
At playoff time, it hurts not to be in the game with the boys. So that no further harm will be done, I would like to ask everyone to get behind the team and help the boys to win from Rangers and Detroit.
The riot, I think, signaled the end of the relationship between my father and Dick as a working combo. My dad was very upset that Rocket wasn't handled better, and he told Dick at the end of that season that he said, look, I think it's time for us to make a change.
Coaching the Montreal Canadiens was no longer merely about guiding the team to victory. A coach in Montreal had to be mentor, cheerleader, and spokesman as well. Few possessed the skill set needed to succeed in that setting. Two candidates were identified, both minor league coaches, both well-versed in the Canadiens' world. Roger Léger, coaching in Shawinigan, was Frank Selke's leading contender. But Maurice Richard and Ken Reardon, a former player and now Selke's assistant, lobbied for Toe Blake. Reardon was particularly emphatic.
The one thing about Toe is that he'll control the Rocket. Rocket will, you'll never have trouble with him if Toe is the coach. And let's face it, Toe turned out to be a very, very good coach.
Blake's arrival meant new blood behind the bench, but Selke knew that the team needed a steady stream of new blood on the ice as well. Depth players who could stand behind the first line and step into battle as needed. The players in this pipeline would be harvested from the farm system that Selke had been building since joining the team. One such recruit showed up in 1955 from the junior Canadiens.
Mr. Selke called me, and he called Maurice, and we went up to the office, and he asked Maurice, he said, what do you think, Maurice, do you think he's ready? He said, yes, he's ready, and he walked out. So I stayed right there, and I couldn't speak a word of English then. So he made me sign a contract, 2-year contract.
Henri Richard, évidemment, était un peu dans l'ombre de son frère Maurice, mais il avait beaucoup des qualités de Maurice. C'était un gagnant, c'est un bonhomme qui était hargneux aussi, tout comme Maurice. Mais il n'y avait pas la même, disons, peut-être pas la... on se dit qu'il n'y avait pas la même force physique, c'est peut-être pas vrai, parce qu'il s'est battu avec quelques-uns des joueurs les plus costauds de la Ligue nationale à l'époque. Je pense à Bill Jusda, à Jack Bionda et à certains autres. Et il avait tenu son bout, et ça à l'intérieur d'un même match.
Henry took on Flaman. He took on anybody, that got in his way.
Henri a connu, lui aussi, une carrière absolument exceptionnelle. Et je pense qu'avec tous les succès qu'il a eus, il a réussi quand même à se détacher de l'ombre envahissante de son frère Maurice.
Henri Richard's abilities as a player quickly made him a key part of the powerhouse that Toe Blake was building. Other players waited, content to watch their heroes and contribute where they could.
Les 12 premières parties, j'ai pas joué. J'étais assis au bout du banc, puis je regardais, je pratiquais. Et puis, la 12e partie, M. Émile Bouchard, Bouchard, se fait blesser. Puis Bouchard, cette année-là, il voulait même plus jouer, mais Toe Blake l'a pratiquement forcé de jouer. Puis il dit, tu vas me donner un coup de main avec les jeunes, puis toute la balle. Il a décidé, mais après les 12 parties, qui s'est fait blesser, il ne voulait pas rejouer. Ça fait que moi, j'étais gêné. C'est moi qui ai pris sa place, M. Émile Bouchard.
In 1959, the team was driving towards their 4th Stanley Cup in a row, their 11th as a franchise, and aces such as Dickie Moore piled up the points.
Well, again, it was something you never dreamt you'd be able to do, win a scoring champion in the NHL. You're playing with and against the greatest hockey players in the world. And playing with Henry and Rocket, because I had an injury, broke my wrist, and I thought my chances were all over.
Parce qu'il avait demandé, il avait dit à Toe Blake, il avait mal, il avait le poignet dans le plâtre, puis il pouvait pas. Et puis, je me souviens, j'ai entendu parler de ça, j'ai dit, ben non, Dick, il n'y a pas d'affaire. Il jouait aussi bien avec un poignet cassé qu'avec sa détermination. Reste là, mon Dick, tu vois. Définitivement, il a bien resté là, puis il a gagné. Puis on a fait gagner la Coupe Stanley, puis il a gagné le meilleur compteur, je crois.
The 50s dynasty dominated the league en route to an unprecedented run of 5 Stanley Cups in a row. The leadership of Richard on the ice and Toe Blake behind the bench, combined with a roster that was stable, talented, and hard-working, made for an unbeatable combination from 1956 to 1960. The Canadiens rolled over their competition, and in doing so, crowned the legend of the Rocket.
Maurice Richard, c'est probablement le joueur le plus spectaculaire et aussi qui a la plus grande renommée pour des raisons évidentes. Et les années 50, le contexte social, le contexte politique, le contexte religieux, ici au Québec, était extrêmement important, le contexte religieux surtout, parce que le clergé était omnipuissant. On a souvent dit que c'était les années de la Grande Noirceur. Or, le peuple québécois était un peu brimé, avait besoin de héros. Alors, Maurice Richard est devenu vraiment le chevalier sans peur et sans reproche ici pour le Québec. Et ça a été, je pense, si on refaisait l'histoire du Canada, le premier grand héros québécois, à mon avis.
As the Rocket is stopped once, and while on his knees, is still trying to shoot when he's crashed to the ice again.
Ken Reardon, who was an executive with that team, he told me that if Rocket had been in better shape, they could have kept him and he said, we had him, in fact, he said, we got away with it, keeping him on the team for the last couple of years, because he was surrounded by so many good players. But he said because he was surrounded by these good players that he said we hid him. We were able to hide him. And he wasn't as good as he used to be, but he was still Rocket. He was still out there, and he still got your attention the minute he stepped on the ice. Boy, did he ever, you know, and right up to the very end.
It was pretty obvious that with Rocket retiring, the heart of the team was, if not gone, it was damaged. Not only was he a marvelous player, driving force, a leader, he also was very physically intimidating. He didn't fool around with Rocket. Well, he was gone. So the next move was we got to put some beef and brawn in this organization.
The 50s dynasty came to an end with a thud when Chicago beat the Canadiens to win the Stanley Cup in 1961. It was time to rebuild, and Frank Selke set about the task. By 1964, a new team had emerged, still including scorers like Boom Boom Geoffrion and Jean Béliveau, but also with young talent from the farm system like Yvan Cournoyer and Bobby Rousseau, as well as hard-nosed players like John Ferguson and Ted Harris.
And suddenly, the Canadiens were no longer the team that you could push around, and nobody's taking a run at Montreal anymore.
Selke also took advantage of this time to change the chemistry of the team, sending away players like Jacques Plante and Doug Harvey that had become a distraction. Players leaving the hallowed halls of the Forum soon learned how the other half lived.
When I asked him, I said, what should I ask in Boston? I said, here in Montreal, we're making lower salary than anybody else in the NHL. We're lucky, we win the cup, we made bonuses, it's good. I said, the thing, I want Mr. Selke, I said, I'll ask you, how much should I ask Boston? That's what I'm asking you. He said, no, son, you don't go to Boston to make money. You go to Boston to play hockey. That's the last time I talked to Mr. Selke.
Et lorsque j'étais à New York, il faut que je dise que c'était un bien pour un mal pour un bien, si vous voulez. Parce que ça m'a donné une autre carrière, mais non pas défensif, mais plutôt offensif. Et c'est là que j'ai pu finir dans les 10 premiers compteurs de la Ligue.
If Frank Selke put the team together, it was Toe Blake that orchestrated what happened on the ice. 1964 would be Blake's 9th year as coach, but perhaps more importantly, 27 years since he started as a Canadien. Blake by now had a wealth of wisdom and a bond with the Habs that ran deep.
Moi, quand je travaillais au morning le matin, on me demandait d'avoir toujours la photo de la première étoile ou quelque chose comme ça. Je me rappelle cette journée-là, Henri Richard avait eu la première étoile, mais on avait perdu 5-3. Et puis Blake était en furie, puis il ne nous a pas laissé rentrer dans la chambre des joueurs. Alors, je suis arrivé au journal, j'ai pas la photo d'Henri parce que Blake ne voulait pas me laisser rentrer dans la chambre. Puis ils ont écrit un article un peu dur envers Blake. Puis le lendemain, j'étais à la pratique, puis il était là, puis il m'accrochait dans le coin, il me disait « Fais pas ça encore ».
C'était un gars qui était très, très, très honnête. Puis, tu pouvais des fois, il n'y avait pas besoin de parler. Juste à le regarder, tu voyais ce qu'il voulait. Puis,
So anyway, he stops me on the street and he said, Dick, how do you like it here in Montreal? I said, oh, I like it here. It's a nice city. I like it here. And he said, how do you get along with the guys in the team? I said, I think I fit in good. That's okay. Everything's good there. And he says, yeah, well, I'll tell you what. If you don't start playing the way I think you can, you might not be here too long. See you later.
With a remade team in Toe Blake's hands, Selke's job was done. He had brought the team out of the wilderness. He had built a farm system second to none, and he had paved the way for more success than any other team in the league. It was time to step aside and pass the torch to Sam Pollock. The Canadiens were back to full strength, and in 1965 they took their first Stanley Cup since the Rocket had left. They followed that up with a second cup in 1966.
Moi, je m'emmenais. Dave Ballon était dans le coin de la patinoire de Détroit. Et puis là, je m'en allais vers le gardien de but. Puis là, j'ai crié Dave, Dave. Et puis il m'a passé la rondelle. Puis il y a quelqu'un qui m'a forgé. J'ai tombé. Et puis la rondelle m'a frappé l'épaule. Et j'ai juste manqué le poteau. Puis la rondelle est rentrée. Puis le gardien de but avait dit que je l'avais lancé avec ma main. Puis c'était absolument faux.
2 cups in a row and a second dynasty was on the horizon. Expo 67, the World's Fair that had been awarded to Canada in celebration of her centenary, was to be in Montreal that summer, and some speculated that a place was being held for the Stanley Cup. It was not to be. The Canadiens ran into an old, tough, but hungry Maple Leaf team.
And I think our veterans basically felt this was the last hurrah, so to speak, and they just made up their mind. They were going to give it their best shot.
And the Leaf captain hits the empty net.
And we ended up winning that big, important. We thought it was the most, and Montreal did, and I think they were under too much pressure, and we kind of beat them in that round.
But Ivan Cournoyer said to me not long ago, he said, Ron, I think we got a little ahead of ourselves.
Come training camp, there was a dramatic change in the NHL. The era of the original 6 had ended, and expansion had doubled the size of the league. The creation of 6 new teams meant a reshuffling of players. The Canadiens lost some players, gained others. All of a sudden, there was new competition, and new fans from Montreal.
Pour nous, là, on s'aperçoit, lorsqu'on allait vers l'ouest, lorsque les premières franchises sont arrivées dans l'ouest du pays, lorsqu'on est arrivé à Vancouver, on était aussi applaudi, c'est pas plus applaudi que l'équipe locale. Donc, pour vous dire comment l'organisation du Canadien est grandie à travers le pays. Et je suis sûr que dans les Original 16 Teams, la même chose en ce qui concerne les équipes. Lorsqu'on va à Boston, puis à Chicago, puis à Détroit, puis à New York, aux États-Unis, les premières franchises, on est une équipe qui est très établie avec le temps, puis très respectée.
Expansion was good for the Habs. They won cups in 68 and 69. But in 1970, they failed to make the playoffs for the first time in 22 years. Toe Blake had retired the year before, and many blamed new coach Claude Ruel, although the team was not that bad. In fact, many were sure they could have easily won the expansion Western Division, But regardless, the bitter pill of defeat went down hard. Sam Pollock made some adjustments in the off-season, such as bringing in Big Frank Mahovlich, already a star in Toronto and then Detroit.
I was very upset, and I let them know. I even let Sam Pollock know that I was upset. But he calmed me down and told me that as soon as you get here, we're going to have some meetings. And for some reason, I believed him, you know. And I learned to mistrust a lot of management over the years, but for some reason I believed in Sam Pollock, and boy, that was the right move I made, because when I went to Montreal, he set things right. You know, he did things right. He did have meetings with me for a year or two, and we straightened a lot of things out.
Coached now by Al McNeil, the team that went into the 1971 playoffs was a new version of the classic Canadien Flying Frenchman. Fast, high-scoring, and exciting.
Bobby Hull went to the length of the ice, carrying the puck, gave it to the center iceman, got it back from him at the red line. He stepped about 1 foot or one step inside the blue line, and he let go one of his famous slap shots. And I'm not sure if it was Dryden, Ken Dryden, that was in goal, and he waved at it and missed it. The puck hit the crossbar and either bounced out or hit the post then and bounced out. I couldn't quite see it. If that puck goes in, we got a 3-0 lead, and that's it, the game's over. But as it turned out, it went over to Jacques Laperriere, who threw it up to Jacques Lemaire, and his knuckler happened to slip by.
I think was one of the highlights of my career, playing with the Montreal Canadiens. I just wished I would have been there from day one. It would have been a much better career. I really feel that.
That cup win against Chicago marked another turning point in the history of Les Canadiens, the retirement of Jean Béliveau. This would be the last time Le Gros Bill would hoist the cup.
My first memory of the Canadiens was the uniform. They would come in to Madison Square Garden, and they looked different than any other team. There was an air about them. It was regal. There was a certain imperiousness about Jean Béliveau. He was tall, he was handsome, and he skated beautifully. And they played the game right, in the way that the Boston Celtics played basketball, the right way. The Montreal Canadiens played the right way.
The big, graceful center gets his way neatly around Golden and Pronovo, and with remarkable accuracy, his shot is just inside the post.
Mon idée était faite de... j'avais 39 ans, j'étais pour avoir 39 ans, et c'est Sam Pollock qui m'a fait venir une journée, et il m'a dit, Jean, es-tu capable d'en jouer une autre? Il dit, l'équipe est en transition, nous avons beaucoup de jeunes, et je te rapporte là les paroles que Sam m'a adressées, et il dit, je me sentirais beaucoup plus à l'aise si je savais que tu étais pour être dans la chambre. Alors j'ai dit, Sam, OK, je m'en enjoins une autre, mais 1 an à l'avance, vous savez que c'est ma dernière.
And the Canadiens win the Stanley Cup.
There's a quality type of game that you enjoy playing. I'll be turning 40 in 1971, and I thought that at 40 you cannot perform like when you're 30 or 32 or up to 35. So that was the main reason. But it was asking a lot of my physical too, and I could feel it. I said, it's about time I retired.
His legacy secure, Béliveau pulled off his number 4 for the last time. The beginning of the 1970s was a tumultuous time for the Canadiens. The retirement of Jean Béliveau, though it had been expected, was a blow to the team. Not surprisingly, there were internal struggles as well, and in Montreal, a locker room spat quickly became front-page news. Al McNeil had taken over as coach halfway through the season, and not everyone was a fan.
Well, he knew me. He knew how to play me, and everything just fit beautifully for me. I didn't have a problem there, you know, as long as I had Al McNeil. And all of a sudden, we win the Stanley Cup. Now, we had a problem. He would bench certain players at certain times, Al, and Henry didn't. Henry was a little upset.
Bucket would say something that, you know, that guy doesn't know what he's saying, or things like that, you know. But it didn't dawn on me that it was something that was really important, you know, until that fight happened.
Now, newspapers got a hold of it. Well, gosh, we had to have bodyguards around at the end of the season, you know, because they were criticizing Al McNeil and what he was doing. Fall training camp comes along, and Sam Pollock fires Al McNeil and brings in Scotty Bowman, and no one was more upset than I was. So I was honest with Sam Pollock. I says, "What are you doing?" I says, "I finally find somebody." He's, "Oh, Frank, we didn't fire him." He said, "We just shuffled the deck." You know, this was Sam Pollock.
Le club de hockey canadien l'a envoyé à Halifax pour être instructeur. Puis c'était une bonne chose parce qu'Al McNeil était bon pour développer les jeunes dans le sens que pour lui, c'est important que les jeunes puissent jouer, aient du temps de glace. Et le fait aussi que Al McNeil avait vécu un peu ce que c'était de gagner la Coupe Stanley avec le club de hockey canadien, l'atmosphère, ce que ça prenait, l'attitude de travail et tout. Il a fait une continuité de ça avec Halifax.
Scotty Bowman was born to be behind the Canadiens bench. A native of Montreal, he cut his teeth coaching in the Canadiens farm system until breaking into the NHL with the St. Louis Blues, a team he took to the Stanley Cup Finals 3 times, twice against the Habs. Sam Pollock was convinced that Bowman was the coach that the Canadiens needed.
Scotty était un instructeur qui était sévère, qui, à cette époque-là, c'était la façon de gérer, c'était la façon de diriger les équipes.
Il était un grand coach. Pour nous, à Montréal, je veux dire, il était très bon techniquement. Dans son temps, Scotty était très vite derrière un banc, voir, disons, les situations, s'ajuster une situation, quel joueur envoyer à tout moment. Il y avait les pratiques, disons, qui étaient différentes dans un sens.
And always high tempo, always passes on the tape, and you did that, and timing had to be perfect, and you only do that when you've got things happening at top speed, and everybody's doing it at top speed, and consequently that's the way our practices were.
Puis je pense, je veux dire, Scotty, je veux dire aussi, sa grande qualité, c'est son instinct durant la partie. Ça pense qu'il pensait du hockey, de la game. Il était toujours bien préparé. Avant un match, on parlait toujours de l'autre équipe adversaire. Il nous faisait un résumé de tous les joueurs, leur bon côté, leur mauvais côté, leurs faiblesses. Disons qu'on était bien préparé. Puis il avait le don, disons, d'envoyer des bonnes formations sur la patinoire.
C'était un gars qui imposait énormément de respect. C'était un gars qui allait chercher le maximum puis, du joueur en tant que tel. Mais à mes débuts, moi, avec les Canadiens de Montréal, il y avait énormément de talent, autant du niveau club ferme qui jouait à Halifax.
Pour envoyer un message s'il n'était pas satisfait, mettons, pour certains joueurs, bien, on avait cette fameuse formule. Quand on arrivait dans la chambre le matin, on avait des différentes couleurs pour les chandails. Si tu avais un chandail burgundy, tu savais que Scotty n'était pas fier de toi, que tu n'étais pas content, puis ça voulait dire du travail de plus à la fin de la pratique, beaucoup de patinage, puis c'est la façon d'envoyer ces messages.
Mais il y a une phrase que Scotty me dit qui me fait tout oublier. Je pense juste au bon côté qu'on a eu avec Scotty, c'est-à-dire toutes les victoires. C'est qu'il a dit, il y a simplement un regret de son temps avec le Canadien, c'est qu'il n'a pas eu le temps de remercier tous les joueurs qui l'ont aidé à gagner tous ces trophées-là. Et ça m'a fait oublier plusieurs choses que Scotty a peut-être faites à l'occasion.
Bowman was the right man at the right time. He tightened up the Canadiens' play and guided them to their 18th Cup in 1973. For Henri Richard, the captain, the victory meant a league record 11th Stanley Cup.
It was Henri's last cup. And just out front of where they presented it, we started to go around the ice, and he got hit by a battery in the back of his head and cut him. And we didn't do the lap around the rink, and we just took him the rink down the stairs and out and gone. And I always remember that because I always remember the pained look on Henri's face that night. You know, he was such a competitor. And he just made the decision, no, I'm not going around, we're getting out of here with it. And we took the cup and left.
The ceremony had been done in Chicago, and he was going off the ice, and I ran towards him. Everybody was on the other side, and I said, why don't you put the Stanley Cup on your shoulder?
Good evening, everyone. Happy New Year. I'm Dave Reynolds.
Since the excitement of the Summit Series in 1972, hockey fans had debated the merits of North American and European styles of play. 1975 would see the discussion reignited as the Soviet Red Army team, considered the best in the USSR, came to play 4 games against NHL teams. The match scheduled for New Year's Eve in Montreal became one of the most memorable games in hockey history.
Lorsqu'on nous a annoncé qu'on jouait la veille du jour de l'an, je pense que c'était notre seule journée de repos, si tu veux.
L'atmosphère était extrêmement fébrile, extrêmement tendue, mais c'était une belle atmosphère. C'était une atmosphère agréable.
Le Forum est heureux de présenter ce soir ce match tant attendu du hockey international entre les champions 1975 de l'Union soviétique, l'Armée rouge, et les Canadiens de Montréal.
And then they do the introductions. You can just see, and today I still see, I've watched the replay of the camera go down the faces, and I don't think I've ever seen our team more focused or more nervous, just like racehorsing. Everyone's got the skates going. Everybody just, let's get at it.
We were all standing on the blue lines, and then they played theirs first, and then Roger Doucette sang the national anthem after, and everybody in the building was singing. Everybody. I mean, just your legs were shaking. You were so nervous. It's probably as nervous as I've ever been for any game.
Et évidemment que Scotty Bowman avait dit à ses joueurs, parce que Scotty est un fin renard, comme on sait, avait dit à ses joueurs éviter les pénalités parce que ça, les Russes savaient en profiter. Ils avaient des jeux de puissance absolument extraordinaires.
In the 6:30 meeting with Scotty was no penalties. We want to stay away from their power play. Okay, I understand. Well, it was 27 seconds. It was almost the end of the shift. We started. Had an opportunity on a breakaway just before that. Didn't get the good enough shot off away. And circled back. The puck came around the boards. And the big Russian D was there. And, well, he was just open game, that's all. So gave him a little bump, and he dropped his stick. But when I came up, he grabbed my stick. And all I was doing was trying to get my stick back. Now, unfortunately, his face got in the way of it, I guess. Anyways, I remember it was the longest skate because I had to skate back towards the Canadiens bench, and there wasn't a chance I was looking at Scotty.
Et ça a été un match qui s'est terminé, en fait, je pense que ça s'est terminé comme il fallait que ça se termine. Parce que ça a été une égalité, finalement. Et puis, ça a été, écoutez, à mon avis, là, moi, j'en ai vu quand même plusieurs matchs. J'ai vu plusieurs séries de la Coupe Stanley et tout. J'ai vu plusieurs, on parlait des dynasties et tout ça. Mais c'est quand même, probablement, je n'irais pas dire que c'était le meilleur match, mais c'est certainement un des 2 ou 3 meilleurs matchs que j'ai vus dans ma carrière.
The spring of 1976 saw the Stanley Cup final pit the Philadelphia Flyers against the Canadiens. Many observers saw much more than the Stanley Cup at stake in this showdown. Some saw a struggle for the future of the league.
I watched in '76 on television, and I thought that was a defining moment for the history of the National Hockey League because the Barbarians were at the gate. The Philadelphia Flyers had won back-to-back cups. Hockey was sliding down a path that I didn't think was very healthy for the sport. And I thought the Canadiens swept in and basically saved hockey from degenerating into something that no one really wanted.
Les Broad Street Bullies pratiquaient l'intimidation, donc, et les équipes, surtout quand ils allaient jouer à Philadelphie, étaient très intimidées. C'était extrêmement difficile de les battre. Alors, ce qui est arrivé, c'est quand le Canadien a battu les Flyers en 4, ça a changé tout l'aspect du hockey, toutes les perspectives du hockey. Alors là, on s'est rendu compte que l'intimidation, c'était pas nécessairement gagnant tout le temps. Alors, le Canadien a prouvé à ce moment-là qu'avec le talent, on pouvait battre les Flyers et leur intimidation.
For the next 3 years, the Canadiens were unstoppable. The new dynasty, the 70s dynasty, led by Bowman behind the bench and spectacular Guy Lafleur on the ice, took 4 Stanley Cups in a row.
The guys used to joke around in the room. Hey, what does that mean, lose? You know, they didn't believe in losing. They came in the room and all they did was say, "We're winning tonight. Nobody's going to stop us."
Oh, we were arrogant. We were phenomenally arrogant. I mean, the tavern was such an important part of 1970s Montreal for me. I mean, you would gather at particular taverns because there were particular people there who knew this, that, or the other about hockey and dismissed everybody else. I mean, it was just a wonderful Saturday night ritual to gather at one place or another and watch the game and just presume they were going to win.
Dans les années 70, on s'attendait à ce que le Canadien gagne. C'était, premièrement, c'était presque tous les mêmes partisans qu'on avait au match. Les gens avaient des billets de saison. On ne changeait pas. C'était pas comme la nouvelle génération où il y a un tournant de spectateurs, où l'émotion est beaucoup plus grande. Très peu portaient le chandail du Canadien. Il y en avait, mais c'était pas comme aujourd'hui. Il y a une différence, mais le partisan était derrière. Pour lui, c'était un respect de ses joueurs, mais on s'attendait à ce qu'on gagne et c'est ce qu'on faisait dans ces années-là, heureusement pour nous autres.
The 70s dynasty would end in 1979 with the fourth straight cup and the sixth in the decade. As was often the case, the actual cup final, this time against the New York Rangers, was anticlimactic after the semifinal, a 7-game battle against the Boston Bruins, a series that ended in sudden death overtime, with the fate of a dynasty hanging in the balance. It is a match that has since become famous, known as the Too Many Men game.
Je pense qu'à la deuxième, il menait 3-1, mais on était encore confiants parce qu'on avait nos partisans derrière de nous autres, puis on était revenus souvent contre les Bruins. Alors, on a mis ça 3-3, mais quand ils ont mis ça 4-3, ça on était sur le banc, là, c'est pareil comme si on avait eu un couteau à travers le corps. On voyait les minutes qui restaient, puis la foule était debout.
Scotty called me up, and I jumped on the ice, and I actually had the puck at center ice. It was a loose puck, and grabbed it, and I remember looking behind me and seeing 6 guys chase me, or what seemed like 6 guys chase me, right?
And apparently the linesman was telling them, yelling, there's too many men. But after 5, 6, 7 seconds, he had to call it.
Il restait peut-être 1 minute et 30 à jouer. Et puis j'avais mon col, puis là, j'avais dit au policier. Le policier m'avait dit, c'est fini, Roméo. Là, j'avais sorti de mon salon, j'avais été dans le coin, puis là, il restait 1 minute, la punition. Et c'est quand Jacques Lemaire a fait la passe à Guy Lafleur. Puis Guy Lafleur, il a compté. Là, c'était un des plus beaux moments.
Gilles Gilbert played a hell of a series against us. He had at least 50 shots or more. And the tying goal, Guy just hit the inside post, to tie it up 4-4. And then in overtime, it was back and forth. Dryden made some great saves against Middleton, O'Reilly, and Gilles Gilbert made a hell of a save on me.
We were all looking at Mario. We thought because Mario had a great shot. We all thought Mario was going to roof it, and the next thing you know, he slides it across to Yvonne.
And 2 minutes later, we did the same play, and the puck went in.
Bang! That was probably Lambert's biggest goal of his career.
16,000 fans, unbelievable. It was a great moment. I'm going to remember that because after the games, I was at least 24 hours more popular than Guy Lafleur. So I'm always, and the next day all came back to normal. Okay,
The 1979 campaign would be the last for Yvan Cournoyer, Ken Dryden, and Jacques Lemaire. As the curtain fell on the 70s, the Canadiens bid farewell to one of the most dominating runs in the history of team sports.
Quand on rentre dans la chambre, c'est exceptionnel parce que il y a du respect qu'on doit amener et de continuer la tradition, c'est de gagner. Alors pour moi, ça a été vraiment un défi exceptionnel que j'ai retenu toute ma vie. Mais pour jouer avec Canadiens, c'est incroyable, je pense que.
My first year was the last year for Scotty Bowman, which left a, obviously a huge hole. One of the greatest coaches ever to coach, if not the greatest. Ken Dryden left that year, which obviously left a huge hole. And Jacques Lemaire left. Yvan Cornway had to retire because of his back, and Jacques Lemaire left, which, to lose your number one centerman at the time and the perfect centerman for Lafleur and Schutt. Four pretty big core group of guys leaving the team, plus your head coach. So, Sam Pollock had retired, and Irvin Grumman had come in. So there was a lot of issues also at the top that were kind of filtering down. So I think it had a big effect on the players, and I think there was a lot of uncertainty with new goaltenders coming in and new players, and so I think it just took a little while for that to get straightened out and for Montreal to find its path again.
À cet temps-là, il y avait vraiment un changement de l'équipe. Il y avait les grands joueurs comme Serge Savard qui avait quitté notre équipe et la position de capitaine était ouverte. Et moi, avec un nombre des autres joueurs, avait eu l'expérience avec l'équipe. Et finalement, avec beaucoup de... avec les dirigeants et les entraîneurs avaient beaucoup de dire de qui va être le prochain capitaine et éventuellement j'ai pris la position.
Certainly losing so many players in the early 80s took its toll, but after Scotty Bowman left, the chaos behind the bench was crippling. In the 7 seasons after 1979-80, the Habs had 5 different coaches. Boom Boom Geoffrion lasted 30 games. Then came Claude Auduel, Bob Berry, Jacques Lemaire, and Jean Perron. In 1983, Canadiens president Ron Corey shook things up. He decided to start with a clean slate, firing GM Irving Grumman. Then he made a call to Winnipeg.
J'étais à Winnipeg, et ça c'est au printemps 83, une semaine après les séries éliminatoires. J'ai reçu un appel de Ronald Corey. Il voulait me rencontrer. Il ne m'a pas faire le poste immédiatement, mais il voulait me rencontrer. Et là, c'était un peu un choc pour moi parce que j'avais jamais pensé continuer ma carrière dans le hockey, mon après-carrière dans le hockey. Et ça s'est fait comme ça. 2 semaines après, je suis gérant général du club de hockey canadien en 83. J'avais l'intention à cette époque-là de jouer probablement une autre année avec Winnipeg.
Savard set about making changes, but the Canadiens continued to struggle. 1983-84 was their worst regular season in over 30 years. Savard's success was gradual. The team rebounded under the coaching of Jacques Lemaire in 1985, but Lemaire disliked the glare of the spotlight. He resigned to become director of hockey personnel. He favored his assistant, Jean Perron, for the job.
3 gars dans le camp d'entraînement se sont fait blesser un œil. Curvers, Jean Hamel est obligé de se retirer, et Pierre Mondou, qui était notre 2e meilleur centre après Bobby Smith. Et là, Serge Savard me met un paquet de jeunes comme Patrick, Sergio Momesso, Claude Lemieux, Scroodlund, Cordick. En tout cas, j'en avais 9 à un moment donné, puis ça, c'est sans compter les Mêlés, puis les Rooney, puis les Serge Boisvert qui sont arrivés à la fin de l'année. Mais c'était une période où Serge voulait que ces jeunes-là soient l'avenir du club. Ça a été une année, surtout un début d'année difficile. Et je le dis encore aujourd'hui, on n'aurait pas été capable de gagner si on n'avait pas eu nos bons vétérans comme Bob Gainey, Larry Robinson, Ryan Walter, Bobby Smith, tous des bons vétérans qui ont décidé d'aider et de m'aider avec ces jeunes-là.
And responding or rebounding and winning that year with a team that wasn't projected to win, that was a surprise, and it came at a point in my career where that kind of a jolt gave me the energy and the purpose to go on and play for a couple more years.
The team that Perron helmed to the Cup in '86 was young, with 13 rookies wearing the CH that year. Each was committed to making the Canadiens, but few had the talent of future 50-goal scorer Stéphane Richer.
Tu représentes ta famille, ton village, ta petite région. Surtout que le fait que Ripon, c'était à peu près à 20 minutes de Tursault que Guy Lafleur était né. Tout le monde voulait être un Guy Lafleur. Alors, pour moi, d'être repêché par l'organisation, en quelques mots, d'être près de mon rêve presque réalité. Le repêcher, c'est une histoire, mais de jouer un match ou d'en jouer 500 ou 1000, c'est une autre chose. Mais le fait de savoir qu'un jour, peut-être je pouvais porter l'uniforme du Canadien, c'était un peu comme un rêve.
The 1986 Cup made a superstar of rookie Patrick Roy and announced to the league that the Canadiens were back. In Montreal, the team was doing better than ever. The Forum was packed, and the city was once again in love with their Habs.
I loved walking over to the rink as opposed to taking a cab or getting on the bus, because walking over was almost part of the game preparation. It was like you got to be amongst the people and the hustle and bustle around the Forum and people getting tickets and talking. You could hear them talking about the game, and the excitement of the game was 4 or 5 hours before the game even started.
By 1988, Savard felt that Perron was no longer the man for the job, and once again he acted, this time turning to an ex-policeman in Pat Burns. Burns brought in more discipline, and older players like Captain Bob Gainey bought in, sparking an incredible run to the 1989 Stanley Cup Final.
En 89, on avait la meilleure équipe dans la Ligue nationale. Je veux dire, en 86, on avait quasiment causé une surprise. Je pense que Calgary avait fini premier dans la Ligue nationale. Il y avait une plus grosse équipe que nous autres. Une meilleure sur la patinoire, mais je veux dire, on avait un gardien de but en Patrick Roy qui avait vraiment fait la différence cette année-là. En 89, on avait vraiment une équipe équilibrée. On avait connu une très bonne saison. On arrivait dans les séries éliminatoires sur une bonne note. On avait de l'expérience soit à la défensive ou à l'avant. On était des gars qui étaient capables de compter des buts puis de bien jouer défensivement. Ça fait que on avait autant de confiance. Malheureusement, Calgary avait certainement quelque chose en tête, eux autres aussi. Ils se rappellent de l'année 86, puis ils ont profité vraiment de toutes les chances qu'ils ont eues.
Tout au long de la saison, les deux équipes étaient très serrées dans le classement. Je pense que c'était 1 ou 2 points qui nous avaient séparés. Et c'était quand même assez spécial de se retrouver aussi en finale de la Coupe Stanley. Alors, mais cette fois-là, je dois avouer là, que les Flames étaient en mission. Puis je pense que les gars, un peu comme on l'a vécu, nous, avec Colorado en 2001, les joueurs voulaient remporter la Coupe Stanley, pas nécessairement uniquement, mais pour l'année McDonald. Puis ironiquement, l'année McDonald a marqué un but très important là, lors de ce 6e match-là. 1989 was the first and only time the Canadiens have lost a cup final on Forum ice. That game was also the last that Captain Bob Gainey played in Montreal. He retired after the season, and as is Habs tradition, a new captain was voted for.
Moi, je viens de la vieille école. Le début avec Canadiens, on avait toujours une élection. Puis c'était toujours les joueurs qui décidaient de leur leader, de leur capitaine. Moi, j'ai continué cette tradition-là. Je dis malheureusement, après je suis parti, on a commencé à nommer les capitaines. Puis je pense pas que c'est pas réellement une bonne chose. Parce que le capitaine, c'est quand même assez important. C'est les joueurs qui décident qui est notre leader. Qui est le gars le plus influent sur l'équipe? Qui est capable d'aller parler au directeur gérant en notre nom? Qui va nous représenter le mieux? J'ai eu une année, moi, où j'ai eu 2 capitaines. Et puis, il y a quelques personnes qui nous ont critiqués pour ça, mais après 3 tours de scrutin, c'était la même chose. Il n'y a pas personne qui a cédé. Alors, j'ai décidé de nommer, pas de nommer, mais j'ai décidé de donner le C à Chelios et Guy Carbonneau.
Despite the strong showing in 1989, the white-hot attention of the media, the fans, and what must have seemed like the entire province of Quebec took its toll. Following 3 consecutive second-round playoff exits, Pat Burns and the Canadiens parted ways. Savard had tired of rookie coaches and went with a man that had won Coach of the Year honors in 1987 and 1988, Jacques Demers.
You don't want to let anybody down because you know the great tradition. And I remember signing my contract with Serge, and every team I had signed contracts with, I used to get a bonus for first round, and Serge says to me, I don't give bonuses for the first round. So I realize how, you better make sure you make the playoffs, and you better make sure you win the first round. So here I am in front of, 17,000 people, an old beat-up building in a way, but such tradition. You could smell the hot dogs, and I don't care how old it was. It was just, I made it. I was there, In
1993, Lord Stanley's Cup turned 100. And with Demers behind the bench and Patrick Roy in the net, the Canadiens would once again compete for the Cup, mostly in overtime.
Every game we were in, it was tight, it was overtime obviously, and we just said, okay, here we go again.
En 11 matchs de surtemps, on a gagné 10. C'est un record de la Ligue nationale. Et je pense qu'à un certain moment, l'équipe adverse contre qui on jouait, ou les joueurs adverses, c'est sûr et certain, se disaient, les journalistes, un peu tout le monde, on est dû pour en perdre un match en surtemps.
I mean, when you have the confidence of Patrick and, him standing up and saying, hey, listen, guys, I'll stop the puck. You guys just do your job. And when you have that kind of confidence in a goalie and he has that confidence in you guys, we just went out and played. And the next thing you know, it was 3 games in a row, 4 games in a row.
There's a shot. They score!
Although the overtime record is perhaps the most significant aspect of the 93 playoffs, in the hearts of the fans, there's a special place for Game 2 of the finals. The Los Angeles Kings were within minutes of winning the game when Jacques Demers asked referee Kerry Fraser to measure Marty McSorley's stick.
There's just certain times in games or series and everything you need a momentum change, and we took a chance. In Montreal, the visiting sticks did come crossing by you once in a while down the hall.
L'entraîneur de Los Angeles ou du club visiteur était obligé d'emmener tous les bâtons de hockey avant le match par le petit corridor qui passait juste à côté de notre chambre.
I think we both agreed, Carver and I, that this is the time to do it. So we talked to Jacques and said, hey, we need a little momentum, change here. Marty's stick looks like it's a little on the over curve side, and that's what Jacques was awesome about.
A stick measurement has been called. It's the stick of Marty McSorley.
On avait remarqué que Marty n'avait pas échangé son bâton, puis qu'il restait sa patinoire parce que c'était un joueur important pour eux. Puis on a appelé le hockey illégal. Puis quand j'ai appelé le hockey illégal, j'étais sûr, mais j'étais craintif aussi parce que toutes les caméras, et au forum ce soir-là, il n'y avait pas un mot, on pouvait entendre une mouche.
That doesn't go our way. We're probably in a little bit of trouble here. I mean,
et Kerry Fraser, l'arbitre, mesure, puis ça prend du temps. Ça a-tu pris 5 minutes? Non, mais ça valait que ça prenait 5 minutes. Ça a pris peut-être 30 secondes. Je suis pas sûr qu'il voulait l'appeler, mais il n'y avait pas le choix.
That was a long moment because I'm sure that if it didn't go our way, we would have been critiqued pretty good by the media and the fans the next day. So, fortunately, it happened.
Vous auriez dû voir, si vous voyez la reprise de ça, lorsque l'arbitre a décerné le 2 minutes, tout le monde s'est levé au banc pour changer de bâton, incluant notre banc, parce qu'il y en avait aussi sur notre bord qui avait des bâtons illégaux.
The Habs went on to take the cup, and Patrick Roy cemented his place in Canadiens lore.
Je pense que c'est plus 93, je veux dire, à 86, personne connaissait peut-être Patrick. On avait beaucoup confiance en lui, même si on le connaissait pas beaucoup. Il y avait un air, tout le monde disait qu'il était arrogant, mais je veux dire, c'était un air de confiance. Je veux dire, lorsque tu es un des meilleurs joueurs au monde, il faut que tu aies une certaine arrogance. Puis je pense que Patrick était là. C'est un gars qui était un perfectionniste, un gars qui il se faisait compter un but ou 2 buts, puis le lendemain, il voulait savoir pourquoi, puis il travaillait sur la patinoire justement pour essayer justement pas que ça arrive. Lui, son but, c'était de jouer 82 matchs sans se faire compter un but. Mais en 93, je pense qu'il avait beaucoup plus de confiance. Il savait vraiment dans quoi il s'embarquait. La pression était un peu plus forte. Puis il a répondu avec toutes ces parties en supplémentaire qu'on avait gagnées. Je pense que c'était une grosse performance de lui.
And the years even where people maybe not necessarily think they're qualified to win a Stanley Cup, they find a way to win a cup. And I think it's their history and the people that have built the bridge before, the ones that are there now, built a very strong bridge, and the ones that step onto it respect it, and they find a way to honor it, and in doing so, they bring their best foot forward, and they have success that way.
Dans une équipe, on donne un C, puis un A ou 2A, mais j'ai toujours dit à mes joueurs, lorsque j'étais capitaine, lorsque j'étais gérant général, s'il y a seulement un leader dans cette équipe-là, on est dans le gros trou. Et chacun peut être un leader à sa façon. Et Doug Jarvis ne pouvait pas compter 50 buts comme Guy Lafleur, mais remplissait son talent à 100%, faisait le travail qu'il avait à faire, prenait les mises au jeu. Dans ce sens-là, Doug Jarvis a été un grand leader.
Quand tu jouais avec les Canadiens, tu prenais conscience de l'importance du concept d'équipe. Tu avais vraiment besoin de tout le monde, puis tout le monde avait un rôle à jouer pour aider l'équipe à gagner. Même le joueur qui nécessairement n'a peut-être pas autant de temps de glace ou peut-être ne joue pas sur l'avantage numérique, mais le peu de présence que lui pouvait faire pouvait jouer un rôle excessivement important.
Mais lorsque je suis arrivé avec le Canadien, là, j'étais là avec les grands que j'ai nommés tantôt, les Jean Béliveau puis les Henri Richard, qui, eux, arrivaient de l'époque avant, où est-ce qu'il y avait le Rocket Richard, puis Émile Bouchard, puis tous ces gens-là qui étaient là au début des années 40 et 50. Mais après ça, quand je regardais, moi aussi en haut, je regardais la phrase « Nos bras meurtris vous tendent le flambeau, à vous de le porter très haut ». Donc c'est une phrase qui, avec le temps, m'a frappé.
Lots of times in a team that's successful, different players want to be rewarded differently. Sometimes, a fourth line guy feels like he was, contributed very much, and he wants to be a third line, and kind of just, goes right up the ladder. But we had a great group of guys, and if everyone didn't contribute, we wouldn't have won the cup the year, prior to that. But we weren't a great team, and I think the injuries, the long toll of the season, when we came back the following year, we got behind the 8 ball. We were pushing to catch up. Everyone obviously wants to beat the champions the year before. And it was a real battle for us, and I think there's a real change of attitude. I think the Bell Center was being built, brand new, huge rink. Might have been a difference in opinion on what style the team should have been at that time. The talk of bringing in a high flying, fast-paced offensive style team instead of the style that we did, defensively, and so I think they started to change the personnel of a lot of the guys on our team, in hopes that it'd be a little bit more of an entertaining team going into the Bell Center.
The greatest sound in hockey would occur every night at 6:30 when they would open the gates and the standing room people would come in. There'd be a pounding and a race to the best locations to watch the game. It was the most moving thing you could ever find. I mean, the roar of the crowd is one thing. We all know about the roar of the crowd. But the stampede to the standing room in Montreal, that was extraordinary. I looked forward to it every night. I'd make sure I was in the press box so I could hear the stampede for the standing room people.
Je suis maintenant rendu dans le temple du hockey. C'est ici que le hockey se joue. C'est ici la tradition du hockey. Et sans enlever à rien ailleurs où j'ai travaillé, c'est ici le vrai hockey de tous les jours.
One of the unique parts, there was seats all the way down to the ice level. The fans, you feel, I'm sure when you're on the ice, I could feel when I was on the bench, behind the bench, you feel like they're really on top of you, the people,
Le forum de Montréal, c'était devenu, c'était effectivement très spécial parce que c'était, c'était une chapelle. C'était pas seulement une chapelle, je pense qu'on pourrait dire, et non même pas une église, c'était une cathédrale. C'est parce qu'il y a à l'époque, comme j'ai dit, c'était très religieux, le Québec, et il y avait toujours des connotations religieuses même quand on parlait de hockey. Alors donc c'était vraiment très spécial, et c'était la Mecque du hockey, c'était la Mecque du hockey ici en Amérique du Nord. Donc le Forum, et c'était l'atmosphère qu'il y avait au Forum aussi. On parle encore des fantômes du Forum. On parle encore des fantômes du Forum. Il y avait une tradition là-bas. Il y avait, je sais pas, c'était hors de l'ordinaire. C'était hors de l'ordinaire. Il n'y avait pas un amphithéâtre comme celui-là dans le reste de la Ligue nationale.
The night of March 11, 1996, it all came to an end. It was the cathedral of hockey for 72 years. Its closing marked the end of an era. And a fitting tribute to the building, the team, the fans, and most importantly the spirit of the Canadiens, the night ended with a literal reenactment of the words that since the time of Frank Selke have been emblazoned on the dressing room wall. To you from failing hands we throw the torch. Be yours to hold it high.
Lorsqu'on a fermé le Forum de Montréal en 1996, là, on a vu que le parti de l'histoire partait de l'ancien Forum puis s'emmenait ici au Centre Bell. Donc, c'est sûr que ce moment-là nous a permis de s'arrêter puis de comprendre davantage l'histoire lorsqu'on a passé le flambeau lors d'une cérémonie dans l'ancien Forum. Là, on a vu devant nous peut-être là, s'écouler des années et des années d'histoire de l'équipe avec les pour et les contre, c'est sûr, avec les bons coups et les moins bons, mais tu voyais que l'équipe était prestigieuse à cause des joueurs qui ont joué cette équipe-là et aussi à cause des honneurs qu'ils ont remportés au fil des années. Et je dirais que la période des 5 coupes cette année d'affilée, dans les années 50, a vraiment marqué l'histoire du Canadien aussi. Tu as eu la période de Georges Vézina puis d'Howie Morans, mais tu as eu l'autre grande période des années 50 où est-ce qu'il y a eu 5 coupes cette année d'affilée de gagner. Puis ça, bien, ça fait partie de l'histoire et du suivi, si vous voulez, du flambeau qu'on passe d'une époque à l'autre, d'une décennie à l'autre. Et il y a un bon bout de chemin qui a été fait à travers les temps où est-ce que les générations se sont superposées pour on a continué la tradition.
C'était probablement l'événement là, qui m'a frappé le plus. C'est sûr que gagner les Coupes cette année, c'était le fun, mais je veux dire, en tant que joueur, là, c'était je pense que si des événements dans ces choses-là, dans le temps où ce que tu peux pas manquer, ça c'en était une, certainement. Puis d'avoir eu la chance d'être avec les Stars, puis d'être ici, justement, pour la fermeture du Forum, c'était extraordinaire. C'était un événement, tout le monde encore là. C'est le fun de revoir les anciens joueurs. Puis de la façon dont la cérémonie était faite, c'était fait d'une façon superbe.
One thing the Canadians do so well is events. The way they closed it, and even the next day, we had a Stanley Cup parade. We took all the banners, they had the cup there, we had old Rolls Royces, old Jaguars, everything, go right down St. Catherine Street to the new building. So I guess it was kind of a long party through, and so I didn't really dwell on it that much that night. Although Dickie Moore and I sat at center ice till 5 o'clock in the morning. We were the last 2 people in the building. We walked out of it. We had our Molson sitting there and got up and shook hands and off we went. And never to be done again because they told us we had to leave because they were melting the ice. That was it.
Mesdames, Messieurs, nous vous remercions d'être venus au Forum de Montréal.
Moving the team to the Molson Center was one element in this historic time of change for the Habs. The 90s were a turbulent time for the organization.
Post-Serge Savard era with the Montreal Canadiens has been probably the most tumultuous. Now all of a sudden, Réjean Houle is responsible for this. Still under the auspices of Ronald Corey, obviously, but then you've got to decide on coaches and a draft plan and everything else. I can't think of anything more difficult in a more pressure-filled environment. If not in all of sport, definitely the history of hockey, but certainly one of, if not one of the top 2 or 3 stressful positions in all of sport. New York Yankees, Manchester United, Montreal Canadiens. That's where it ends, right there in sports. But they did go through a depreciating period, as all teams do, and I think that should be noted, as all teams do.
In 2000, the team was put up for sale, and all of Quebec held its breath, waiting to see who would take control of the crown jewel of hockey.
In the 8 years that I've been involved with the Canadiens, it means something different every day, every week, every month, and every year. When I got here, I had no idea. I didn't know what the CH meant. I knew that it represented a hockey team, but I didn't know that it meant the spirit of a province. It started out as a very simplistic, oh, it's a hockey team. No, it's not. It's a way of life. It's the most iconic asset in a province of 7.5 million people, a city of 3.5 million people. It means so much to so many people around the world. So I was wrong. It's much more complicated than a hockey team.
The team, the fans, the city, and the province are interwoven. The relationship is as deep as it is complex. The team has experienced its share of lows, and it has tasted the heights of glory. Everything about hockey is magnified in Montreal. The fans can boo a player, and they can stand up and cheer, and cheer, and cheer.
Il mène le combat de sa vie. Il est notre source d'inspiration. Il est avec nous ce soir. Our champion, le numéro 11, Montreal.
I think every tough experience, and especially when you talk about the difference between life and death, and you have to face a challenge like that, it's going to change you as a human being, and it's going to change the perspective towards life. I don't know if I'm a better person, but I think I can enjoy life more after that.
Écoute, c'est extraordinaire, c'était une belle histoire. Je veux dire, non seulement Sakou est un joueur populaire, mais de revenir d'un cancer, être capable justement de passer à travers ça, ça a fait une plus belle histoire. Je veux dire, beaucoup de gens sont capables de revenir de ce genre de maladie-là, mais ne sont pas capables justement de revenir à 100% ou de vivre une vie normale, que Sakou soit capable, non seulement il était capable de revenir en santé, mais il est capable de performer, puis pendant longtemps, là, je veux dire, ça fait quand même plusieurs saisons encore, puis il performe encore à un haut niveau, puis ça, mais c'est encore plus incroyable. On est dans un sport où il y a les 700 ou 750 meilleurs joueurs au monde, puis après avoir passé ça, être capable de se tenir debout encore puis de performer, c'était le fun.
There was a lot of mixed emotions, and obviously that was probably the toughest year that I've gone through so far. But to be able to go through the treatments and then be able to come back after only about 6-7 weeks of training, and to be able to come back for the last couple of games in the regular season, the playoffs, and obviously the first night when I came back, it's as one specific moment is probably the biggest moment of my life, and I think the way they reacted and the support that they gave me that night and through that year, that really tells all about the people in province of Quebec and the type of fans that they are. And it's that day and that game is something that I will never forget, even though I can't specifically describe how I felt, but that was amazing.
In 2003, Canadiens president Pierre Boivin reached out to a man that had strong ties to the Habs' past and had the intestinal fortitude to guide the Habs' future.
I think, as I said, I think I have personal characteristics, traits, whatever my makeup is, that allow me, it's easier for me to do those things, to stay directed and to stay purposeful and online than it is for some others. And I had those traits as a kid, and I had them as a teenager, not all the time, but most of the time. And so I've been able to transfer those through the different job descriptions that I've worked in the NHL. And some of them don't change. There's good habits you have that will work. in one role or one job description that you can carry with you and use in another job description. There's things that you have to learn in a new job and things that are done that you weren't aware of, but still those baseline things of tenacity and character and trying to do things well and do them right and considering other people's positions, and all of those seem to have worked in each of the different jobs that I've had.
Gainey's decisions have not all been popular, but even his critics will agree that he has the strength of his convictions. In 2006, he hired his longtime friend and fellow Selke Award winner Guy Carbonneau as the 28th coach of the Canadiens. No stranger to the fishbowl that is coaching in Montreal, even Carbonneau was surprised.
Je pense que chaque personne est différente. Moi, comme je l'ai dit, je veux dire, de toute façon, tu peux pas te cacher bien gros ici à Montréal. Moi, j'ai jamais cru en faire ma job pendant 2 heures, puis après ça, m'aller me cacher pendant 22 heures, à revenir le lendemain. Tu dois avoir des contacts. J'avais une vie, j'avais des enfants, j'ai une femme, 2 chiens. Faut que j'aille manger des fois au restaurant. Fait que, je veux dire, faut que tu sois capable de vivre avec. C'est sûr et certain que je courais pas après. Il y a des moments où tu vas avoir ta tranquillité. Il y a des meilleurs moments que d'autres aussi. Lorsque ça fait 3 ou 4 games que tu perds, c'est moins plaisant d'aller manger au restaurant parce que tu sais que les questions vont être différentes, mais tu sais qu'il y a un lendemain, que le soleil se lève le lendemain, puis que c'était la même chose. Puis l'expérience que j'ai connue comme joueur, je pense, dans les années 80, ici, ça m'a certainement aidé à devenir un meilleur coach.
Much as the fans learn the game at the feet of their parents, just as the players learn from the elder statesmen of the team, coaches are part of a continuum, learning from their predecessors, aware of the past. Perhaps more than anybody else in the sport, they feel the weight of their obligation to history.
I saw how much a stickler Toe was for having good practices, having good discipline, being a real terrific bench coach. So most of my early goings on as a coach I developed because I was fortunate. I coached in Montreal for 2 or 3 years junior, and this is when Canadiens were in their heyday as well. And Toe, I think, coached like 13 years. But they had, like, I was there in the 64, and this is when Canadiens won 3 in a row, 64, 65, 66. And I was coaching a junior team at the time. So I learned so much by just being around, listening, asking questions, and Toe was always very gracious to give the answers. And so that I was fortunate to be started my career with Montreal for the first 10 years. From 56 to 66, before I went to St. Louis, I was exposed to a lot of wins, a lot of tough losses. I mean, everything.
Je pense que lorsque j'étais jeune, Scotty était dans ses bonnes années avec le Canadien. C'était un des meilleurs entraîneurs qui a passé dans la Ligue nationale. Je pense que Scotty a eu une réputation, disons, d'être capable de sortir le maximum de ses joueurs. Aussi, c'est un individu, disons, derrière le banc qui était très habile, très alerte et qui faisait un travail, disons, excellent, disons, derrière le banc. Comme entraîneur, tu dois développer ton propre style, mais je pense que c'est important de prendre disons, des choses que les autres entraîneurs ont connu du succès avec. Premièrement, on regarde un gars comme Scotty qui était quand même très exigeant, une très bonne discipline. Donc c'est important d'évaluer les points forts d'un autre entraîneur et essayer d'aller chercher le maximum.
Now, less than a quarter mile from where it all started in 1909 at the Windsor Hotel, the century has brought the team to the Bell Center, since 1996 the home of Les Canadiens. Game after game, the NHL's largest arena is filled with the league's most passionate fans, clutching their prized tickets to the greatest show on ice. They are part of a century-long tradition, a tradition passed from player to player, coach to coach, and fan to fan through the generations. It is a tradition that continues to this day to be woven through a sweater, a franchise, uniting a city and a province under one banner, in this, the truest capital of hockey.
I think people think about ownership and they say, oh, he owns the Canadiens. We don't own the Canadiens at all. We hold them in trust for our fans. We are stewards of a 100-year tradition, and we're trying to add to that luster. We're trying to continue the luster. I don't think we can ever achieve some of the early success. The rules have changed, the sport has changed, but we want to try and be those stewards that people will continue to refer to as owners in the tradition of Senator Molson, someone of that sort, great character, great history. And so the privilege that we've had is being stewards of this extraordinary, extraordinary history. What a privilege.
C'est sûr que notre effort avec l'équipe, c'est tout ce qu'on fait, c'est pour gagner. Parce que c'est pour les fans que nous avons la responsabilité d'assurer que c'est une équipe qui va gagner.
On ne peut pas réussir dans le sport professionnel si les partisans n'ont pas confiance ou n'ont pas espoir dans leur équipe. Donc, d'avoir fait tous ces efforts-là, si on n'avait pas mis en place une administration de hockey crédible, qui ont pris des bonnes décisions et qui ont fait que l'équipe s'est améliorée d'année en année. On n'est pas rendu encore à notre 25e coupe, mais ça va venir parce qu'on est dans la bonne voie. Les partisans l'ont senti, ça.
On réalise peut-être maintenant ce qu'on a fait de notre carrière avec l'équipe de hockey canadien. On peut être fier de dire, on peut voyager et de parler, de dire je reste à Montréal et on voit des photos de tout partout du type de hockey canadien. C'est incroyable à chaque fois que quelqu'un voyage et porte un chandail du Canadien ou un chapeau du Canadien. Les gens, même s'ils viennent d'extérieur, reconnaissent ce club de hockey canadien. Et c'est vraiment impressionnant de voir comment il y a de gens qui peuvent aimer le Canadien. Et les histoires qu'on entend de tout partout, le temps qu'on jouait, ce qui se passait dans les maisons, c'est vraiment incroyable. Puis c'est quelque chose qui est unique, je crois.
Une des choses qui est vraiment importante, c'est notre présence au Québec. Et la famille Molson a commencé ici à Montréal en 1786. Ça fait 223 ans. Et cette génération que nous sommes à Montréal et nous faisons partie de la communauté montréalaise et québécoise. Les Canadiens ne sont pas différents. Ça fait 100 ans qu'ils sont à Montréal, que l'équipe a connu tellement de succès pendant cette période. Et les deux vont très bien ensemble. La famille des Canadiens de Montréal et la famille Molson se connaissent très bien depuis au moins 100 ans.
It's kind of curious. Here we are in year 100. When I started in 1946 at the Forum, the old Forum, there already was a tradition about the Montreal Canadiens. It goes back to the funny sweater from 1909, the CAC, you start looking at the players that played in those years, Nuzi Lalonde and DJ Pitre and Jack Laviolette and Joe Malone and so on. Ultimately, Howie Morenz and Aurel Joliette and so on. They created an aura or an environment that begged for tradition and heritage and so on. And as I say, even in 1946, it was there. It's only grown, immeasurably since then, to the point where there's no other organization in professional sport, to my knowledge, that can match that kind of aura of heritage and tradition.
There's always been that French-Canadian flair to the organization, to the team, to the fans. That's wonderful. That just, sets it apart, really, from anything else when things are going good, and even when things aren't going so good, they still love hockey. So, it's hockey's Canada's game, and I don't know if I wouldn't dare say Canadians are Canada's team, but they've been the dominant team. You go back to 1950, and you go back to when the television started. Let's face it, in the 50s when TV started, the first one was 1953 finals when Elmer Locke scored the winning goal that beat Boston. What was the last image people saw of Hockey Night in Canada for almost, for the rest of the 50s, give or take a couple of years, was the Montreal Canadiens skating off the ice with the Stanley Cup.
Mais le Canadien, à travers l'Amérique du Nord et le monde entier, tu vois que la présence est là, tu vois it means something, il y a quelque chose qui se passe, tout le monde est au fait de la dynastie, de qu'est-ce qu'on a accompli, les 24 Coupes Stanley. Donc, tout ça est inscrit dans l'histoire et de pouvoir le vivre cette année avec le centenaire du Canadien et de pouvoir l'avoir apporté de l'ancien forum lorsqu'on a eu notre cérémonie puis qu'on a transporté le flambeau ici au Centre Bell. On met tout ça ensemble puis on est heureux. C'est un moment vraiment spécial que nous vivons, nous tous, présentement, le centenaire du Canadien.
Les Canadiens sont là. The Canadians are always there. And that is kind of the exclamation point as far as I'm concerned. They're always there.
I mean, growing up watching Montreal, you learn about the passion that the players have to be able to put on that jersey. And I mean, the fans, like you said earlier, they take ownership of the players and the organization and the team, the CH, the symbol. I mean, there's a lot of pride and passion in putting on that jersey. And I think that attracted me more to that team than any other team in the NHL.
Que tu sois joueur maintenant ou tu étais joueur plusieurs années passées, que tu portes l'uniforme canadien une fois, que tu la portes pendant 500 matchs ou 1000 matchs, on a été choyé de porter l'uniforme du Canadien. C'est une dynastie. Je compare ça aux Yankees de New York, aux Cowboys Dallas. Je compare ça à de grandes franchises. Moi, je dis que je suis certain que même les gars aujourd'hui sont conscients. Quand tu portes l'uniforme canadien de Montréal, comment tu es important aux yeux des gens. Je suis certain que les gars sont conscients de ça, comme j'ai dit tantôt. C'est de réaliser qu'on est choyé de faire partie du centenaire. Puis personnellement, il n'y a pas assez de mots pour dire merci à l'organisation du Canadien de donner la chance de vivre le centenaire avec eux autres.
They, I think, in their 100-year history, became the most important team in the history of hockey. I don't care. You can try to name me a team that has been more important to the game, to the fans, to the way the game has been played over the years. I think the Montreal Canadiens rate that. I really do.